An Ancient Word, the book of Job, selections from chapters 1 to 23:38. There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. But the accuser went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself and sat among the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "Shall we receive good from God and not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Then Job answered, "Today also my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his dwelling. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. If only I could vanish in darkness, and thick darkness would cover my face." Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, "Who is this that darkness counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined his measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? Can you lift up your voices to the clouds so that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings so that they may go and say to you, 'Here we are'? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to number the clouds? Or who can till the waterskins of the heavens when the dust runs into a mass and the clods cling together? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their covert? Who provides the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food?" A contemporary word, Prayer for Bodies by Bika Anderson. God, I will live in this body built by your hands, by acts of the world, planned and unplanned, by my own choices. This body was born with abilities and disabilities. It grew and changed through accident, illness, medical procedure, the passage of time, and more actions and events that we can name. I have made my body my own through prosthetics, assistive tech, tattoos and piercings, medications, intentional movement, meditation, and all the choices one can make about a body. This body is mine, co-created with you, O God. I bless it as it is blessed by you. I bless it in comfort and in pain, in clarity and in brain fog, in ease of movement and its struggles. In the good days and the bad, I bless this body even when I do not love what it does. I bless this body because it is the only body I have, and I will live in it, for we are one. Amen.
Thursday afternoon last week, I went to the Redwoods to the Thursday afternoon group, and Hunter Moore was leading it, which he does occasionally, and it was probably his last time leading it. Hunter is the CEO of the Redwoods, and he is leaving at the end of the year. And we had a really interesting and deep discussion about how do we understand God in relation to our lives. Does God have a plan for us? How do we make our choices? How do we understand this world unfolding before us? And I was reminded of a time as a child, maybe 9 or 10 years old, when I learned about the solar system and I learned about God not being a man, and I went to Sunday school one week and said to my teachers, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, you know, there's no heaven up there. It's a solar system. And I said, God is not a man, so God can't be a father. So we have to rewrite the Lord's Prayer. And of course, you may have noticed that we experiment with that from week to week here ourselves. We borrow from many people who have tried to find a way into this traditional prayer in words that speak to us in our own moment. People were surprised to hear that my teachers said, "Wonderful, let's get started." Because so many of us were brought up in a tradition that said this is the way we think about God, and wanted to corral us into a single dimension, a single direction. I'm tested again by my eagerness and willingness to imagine God from many perspectives by our readings this morning. You know, last week we talked about disability. We talked about how some of us in some of our lives, and all of us at some point in our lives, will experience a change in what we are able to do or to think. This week, we're turning to a slightly different thread because we're looking at suffering. Now, why would a blameless and upright man like Job, someone who feared God and shunned evil, someone who no doubt followed the commandments, kept to the covenant, why would someone like Job, who was a wealthy herder, why would someone like Job suffer in the ways that he suffers in this story? I don't think about the book of Job too often, but it really has become a touchstone even beyond church culture. There are plays about Job, and there are musicians composers who have set Job or parts of Job to music. And that's because the story of Job there's something universal about this. We cultivate our lives, our ethical lives, our hopeful lives, our trusting lives around a certain conception. And then something happens and we find out that we did not have the whole story. We did not have the whole story. In this story, the adversary, part of the divine counsel as it's portrayed in Job, goes out to test Job. Is he really so upright? Does he really fear God? Will he remain loyal in his trust? Well, Job passes that test in most ways, and it's not an easy thing to understand. Why would someone so good suffer? This idea of the adversary, the Hebrew says the Satan, and that has been often translated as Satan, and we've read a Christian understanding of Satan on top of it. But this is ancient Hebrew language. In fact, this book is written in really literate Hebrew. It's written in poetic Hebrew. It's written using a complex vocabulary. It's very theologically sophisticated. It's a Hebrew word, the Satan, which means the adversary. It could mean the prosecutor. It could mean the accuser. Somehow in this divine council are all these other heavenly beings, and one of them has this role to test people. It just doesn't seem fair, and in fact, the text makes it pretty clear that this isn't a fair test. And nonetheless, it happens. And Job loses almost everything. He loses 7 sons and 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels. He had a very large household. This was a wealthy man. He was wealthier than anyone in the East. So we've already got this idea that Job is not living in Judah, and by various readings of the whole of the Bible, we come to understand that Job is situated probably in the time of the patriarchs, the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, 1,000 years before it's written down, or more. That he lives in an area usually called Edom. It's part of what's called the Transjordan, on the east side of the Jordan River and in the southernmost part. And this area is also called Kedem, and Kedemites are known for their wisdom. And so, partly because of where this book is situated in the Bible, and partly by the little hints that we have, this book is seen as a moment to contemplate, to explore the deep wisdom of the tradition. Not the simple instructions about how to live day to day, but the complexities of how life fits together. And indeed, if we're to try to understand it at all, we have to allow ourselves to suspend certain preconceptions and just wonder about things as they are presented. Now, it was probably written down in the post-exilic period. This is after a time when the Israelites were taken into exile and then finally were able to return to their homes in Judah. We don't know who wrote it. It was probably edited later. There seem to be a few mistakes in it. People wonder, shouldn't this have been over there and that have been over there? Maybe there's mistakes in copying. But nonetheless, it's a combination of what we call prose narrative, a story. There was a blameless and upright man named Job. And much of it is written in poetry. It's kind of a dramatic dialogue form. We don't know any other piece of Israelite literature like this, and nothing quite like it in any of the surrounding cultures. So it has a place by itself in our tradition, in our biblical tradition. And what we've heard is just a sample of this text. If we read the whole thing, we would understand that there are at least 3 themes that run through. One of them is that human suffering is not necessarily deserved. And this theme runs counter to the sort of common sense or daily wisdom that says, if something bad happens to you, it's because you did something wrong, or maybe your parents did something wrong. It's admitting that we don't always know why things happen in our lives. We can't explain everything that happens in our lives. And yet, we're asked to recognize that it is here, even to accept that it is here. That is not to approve that it is here, but to say, yes, this is where I am now. This is where I am now. You know, in our more scientific age, we see many causes for suffering, and we must admit some of them are brought about by humans on a local or larger scale. But many things happen that have no logical reason to us. And if all suffering is not deserved, then what does this say about our character, our efforts to live lives of honesty and commitment, lives of devotion, lives of caring? What does it say about our lives in relation to God, however we understand God? What does it say about us? Because we're saying at the same time we have a deep trust in this cosmos that holds us. And yet at the same time we know we cannot fully understand it. What does it say about us that we can trust and wonder at the same time? And what does it say about the character of God? Because if we have a conception that God is all good and all powerful and all knowing, how could it be that we are here suffering? How could God allow these things to happen? It tests our conventional understandings of this cosmos that holds us and on which we rely at every moment. Another thing that happens in this book, and we saw it at the end, is that when God speaks, God doesn't answer the question. God doesn't answer Job and explain why this has happened. God says, take a look again at this amazing universe. Take a look at this earth, which we rely on, which we live on. What are its foundations? It's described in very physical terms here, but we might ask ourselves, what are the ecological foundations of our existence? What is this body of diverse life and livelihood in which we are embedded? And who are we to forget that the awe that we can cultivate and experience is an awe not of full understanding in an intellectual sense, but it is a sense, almost a mystical sense, that this universe, this world, this way of being that we can know, that we experience, that we each experience only partially. And we know we experience it partially because we see someone who has different experience. How do we recognize that our experience leads us one way or another? And that in that leading, we are led to choices, and we must make choices even if we can't know their outcome. That the awe that we experience at all there is part of our way of trusting that even as fallible humans, that we have a place here. Even as fallible humans, even as humans who say, well, maybe God isn't a totally benevolent creator who made every cell of my body line up in one particular way or another. Maybe God is, however all this came about, maybe God is a process of unfolding. Maybe God is a process of change. Maybe God is something that we will not ever, any one of us in our lifetimes, be able to say, I know exactly who and how and when and where God is. And yet, there is this deep sense of trust that we are part of a tradition, a religious tradition, that looks back to our ancestors for recognition that the things we struggle with, our ancestors have been struggling with for thousands of years. And yet, somehow we find a peace. We find an acceptance. We find a recognition that we have lived our best lives that we could, even when we've made mistakes, even when we've forgotten something or broken something or lost something. We have lived as best we could. There's a part of our intellectual tradition since the Enlightenment that asks us to stand back and analyze things from a distance. And we might in that tradition say, well, God as depicted in this book is not a God that I would follow, a God that doesn't answer questions, a God that allows the Satan, the accuser, to go out and cause pain to someone. But God as depicted in this book is not my God. And yet, somehow we know that this is not fully the God of the one who wrote this book either. That there are times when this is how we experience God, as inexplicable, as remote, as judgmental, as causing things that should not happen. That will be our tradition, our experience, if we have certain understandings of God, and we will have those understandings of God, because we'll cry to God and say, why has this happened to me? And some of us will find ourselves with a continuing loyalty, even eagerness, to explore these traditions and other spiritual traditions that grapple with the simultaneous benevolence of this universe that has given us so much, the simultaneous abundance of life around us, of opportunities, of love, of compassion, and at the same time, a universe that is beyond our control. In fact, is not a universe of control. It is a universe of unfolding, a universe of wonder. Our intellectual tradition asks us to stand back and analyze. To stand back and analyze and to see individual details that will explain things to us. This is our mode of science, of most science, not all science, but this is a mode of science where we explore the details. What happens when we do this? What happens when we do that? And increase our understanding of possibility. And yet there is something in the human being that seeks beyond that analytical stand back and seeks to be right in the middle of life with all its intensity and confusion and wonder. To experience the kind of wild self-transformation that can happen when we let go of the assumption that any one of us can fully explain and describe how the world works and how things should be. And when we can let go of that, we can join with others to say, what did you see? What did you hear? Tell me about your life, your experience, your wisdom. How can we together create a community of inquiry and of commitment, of love and understanding, even when we know we have in some ways been so different? And we can experience that wild, and I say wild in the sense that the transformations that we experience when we go deep, or when we go high, or when we go open, however you discuss that transcendent moment, when we allow those, we come to a deeper and deeper or higher and higher, or wider and wider understanding that we are not alone. That our perception of ourselves as single individuals, wholly responsible for everything that happens to us, and we become instead participants, contributors to a community, taking responsibility for the beneficence, the generosity that must be part of a community. Job says, yes, we will suffer. And I think probably none of us here could say we have not suffered. In our own bodies, in our own hearts, in our own minds, in our own families. We have witnessed pain, and we have witnessed despair, and we have witnessed a denial that this could be happening, and we have witnessed a hope that it won't be like this. We have witnessed all these things and so much more. And each time we do, and we open ourselves to that, we find ourselves one step deeper, higher, wider in being part of a community of love, of grace, of commitment. Job, for all the ways that we can't explain what it really means, when we take this thread or that thread, we find ourselves reminded that we too are deeply and wonderfully human. We are wholly human. We are, without doubt, human. And that humanness, I think, is part of what Job is exploring. Exploring that we have capacities we don't fully understand, and yet we do not have the capacity to control, to dictate what will happen. When Hunter asked us, do you, in your experience, have a sense that God has a plan and that your life will follow this plan? There may be moments when we have had that sense, this sense that something holy is pulling us forward. And we may have had the sense that we are wandering in a wilderness and seeking the path, discovering a path, and wondering, is this a path to God? I don't often think about the book of Job, except maybe I do, because we each witness in our lives all the complexities that Job talks about. And we get to celebrate those, celebrate our humanness, celebrate every way that we can move forward, back, side to side in our lives. There once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And maybe Job was me. Or maybe it was someone I knew. And Job, in spite of all his suffering, continued to hold a deep trust. I pray that we may too, that there may be within inside us a deep trust that we are, for this moment, in the right place with the right people, and that we together can become more and more fully human. Amen.